Hello, welcome to Leverage, where I'm going to talk about effectively running large platforms with small teams. Now, we're here at PlatformCon, so I don't think I have to go into too much detail about platforms, but I just sort of want to set some things up for later in the talk. Now, at Comcast, we want our platforms to increase the engineering effectiveness of a rather large engineering org. We want to capture the common patterns and the things that people do every day. And if we can do that, we can sort of get a big force multiplication if we can get a lot of teams adopting a platform. Additionally, there's multiple kinds of platforms that we see. There are product platforms. Product platforms provide features out to our customers, and they allow us to build maybe multiple products on top of them. Additionally, there's the engineering platforms. This is where I spend most of my time. Those are the ones that let us build, deploy, design, maintain software and systems that we're running. And then there's another kind of platform I've been thinking about lately, and it starts to sound like turtles all the way down, but there's a sort of platform for platforms, right? At Comcast, every platform sort of designs its own UI and its own portal that you need to interact with. But at the end of the day, like that ends up being 3 to 4 portals that developers might have to use just to get their job done. And that's not an efficient use of their time. And it's not an efficient use of the platform team's time either to be developing something, bespoke for their particular platform. Now, no one wants to do all the heavy lifting when they use a platform. So often providing just a tool or a service isn't enough to make a platform. We want to not just talk about adopting and using the platform, but also what about happens when it changes? How do we deal with changing the vendor or changing the software that we're running? And how do we let our client, like our engineers, our teams that are using us also take advantage, get some benefit from that? We don't want them making massive changes every time something changes because things change all the time. Now, I'm going to immediately contradict myself. I'm less than 3 minutes into the talk, and I'm going to immediately contradict myself. And that's sometimes I want our development teams to do some heavy lifting. And that's really because our platform should be encouraging best practices. So for example, I'm a big proponent of structured logging. And as we went to design and build an observability system for Comcast, I pushed hard that teams should be adopting structured logging. And we have ways to let them not have to change their code right away, because that would involve a lot of heavy lifting on their part. But the best way I feel is for them to eventually change their habits and their practices to adopt structured logging in from the very beginning. It makes everything in the process just easier. And one way we can do sort of those two main first points is to provide paved paths for people. Maybe we can cover 80% of the workloads that people have with some common paved paths that they can use and easy setup so that they get moving faster and in a common way. And that common way is actually a benefit to the platform team because there's not an individual troubleshooting problem for every client because everybody using the system is doing things differently. Maybe now a bunch of people are following the paved path, and so they have a very consistent way of doing things. And there's still going to be room for the people that need to do complicated things that don't fit on the paved paths. The platform will support them, but they're not going to be the majority and bulk of use cases, or at least hopefully not. Now, there are other challenges to running platforms, and I'll go through a few of those now. Showing your value, right? It's about budget time, but it's also about usage. It's about how people are using your system. You need to know the value that your system's bringing, the value that your platform brings to the wider community, so that you can make proper decisions on, do we continue to run this platform? Do we migrate people to a better platform where it has more value for them? We need to make these decisions. And in order to do that, I really feel like you should be building show back in from the very beginning. You should be able to show what kinds of things that your users are doing and what impact that has possibly on your bottom line. Maybe you tie it directly to money, like is in the picture, but maybe it's just understanding that usage is useful to you, right? And it also lets you look at things like misuse of a platform. We've had cases where somebody might be misusing a platform, but it's hard to show them that. And if you can show them, like, hey, you're 5 times the showback of most teams your size, we think you're doing something off, can we help you? That's a conversation that you can have with your when you're able to show people how they're using your system. Now, what other challenge we see? I'm very fond of this one. I actually call this the crushing wave of adoption, but it made for a very sad sounding slide. So I just put wave of adoption on here. But you see, like, as say, the biggest thing I've seen this happen with is there's a sudden mandate to use your platform. Maybe a VP said everyone in this organization should use the platform, or maybe everyone's moving to a new system and there's a mandate on that they must use your platform to do certain functions on that system. And this can lead to a sudden jump in the amount of people using the system and teams using the system. And that jump, if you're not ahead on some of these other challenges that I have, pardon me, you can be one of these boats about to be crushed by the wave and having to fight against it and implement some of the features and ideas that are in this talk. And that leads us to scale, right? As we get that wide adoption, suddenly our system needs to scale in ways that if we didn't think about it up front, we may not be prepared to scale. So one key to scaling is to automate. Our small teams, they can't afford to waste their time doing manual things that we could do automatically. And that might be onboarding, that might be updating the systems that are running. I don't necessarily have a list of all the things that you could possibly automate, but you'll know them when you see them. There are things you could say, hey, a script could do that work. You should probably have a script doing that work if you can say that. Another key, you really can't expect to run a large company on a single installation. So we really need to decentralize. Now, the extreme version of this is everybody gets their own independent system, but that's probably not practical, because really what happens is that teams are, a lot of small teams could take advantage of a single, say, cluster or system, and then a large team, they might need to be separated out so that they don't swamp everyone else's requests. But once we've decentralized, we need to bring it back together. We need to have a way of viewing the system that is consistent for the client and doesn't require them to, once again, I get this theme of going to different places, right? There should be one place they can go. When you look at an observability system, if you say, we're storing your data in lots of places, we want to bring it all together in one place for them to search and monitor and do all of the work that they need to do. I mentioned change before. Change is huge. Change is constant. This industry is all about change. And it happens to our platforms. And sometimes if we're not prepared for that change, it hurts our users of our platform. So one way to think about change is to be technology agnostic. There's a trap that we sometimes fall into where we sell the technology to our customers rather than the functionality of the platform. And we get stuck on that technology. And when that technology needs to change, we've so embedded it in what people do that it's incredibly hard for us to make that change. And I'm not proposing we take strong measures to prevent vendor lock-in, but we need to be aware and look at the logical places where change is going to happen before we build something. Now, and one way to enable change is to provide abstractions. When we talk about a logging system, for example, Maybe we need to use the simplest abstraction that we have, which is DNS. Let's give a unique name to the locations that different client teams where they send their logs and their metrics, so that because they have their own unique DNS name, if we need to change where they're sending, we don't have to make changes on their side. Because if we go in and say, your 10 machines all need to now change some property value, that's incredibly hard to sell to people. And it takes a while for that team to have the time and to do the due diligence to make that change. If we give them a unique DNS name that where they send their logs, we can simply change that name and route them to a different location, and it will be seamless to them, as seamless as we can possibly make it. I cheated. I added the same picture again because I really like this picture and I really like this message. Another way to help us with change is to automate. We need to look at things like, are there scripts that we can do to help move people from one technology change to another? Could we make automatic pull requests on their repositories that say, hey, if you make the following changes, like, things will be better, and you can test them and prepare for this change that's coming. As much as possible, maybe you're changing the formats, you're moving from one CI tool to another, and so you need to change how pipelines are built. This leads to the paved paths. If they're using the paved paths, maybe we already have a way to automate that paved path. We know what it was. We know how we got them there. We can build it in the new system. But we could also maybe just take pipelines written in one, try to translate them into the other. We need to think about doing these things, because if we don't, it falls on our users to make these changes. And when you're talking about hundreds of teams that are using your system, that's a big program to manage just to make changes. So thank you very much. I want to reiterate some messages. Platforms are hard, but we should make them as easy on our clients as we can. This has the effect of making it harder on us. It's more about value than any specific technology. I like to harp on that. We get caught up in our technical world of sort of saying, we're going to sell this technology rather than selling the value that that technology brings. I said it once, automate, automate, automate. Build automation in from the beginning. You will need it, you will want it, and you will be crushed by that wave if you don't build it in from the beginning. And then abstract when it makes sense. Look at your system, look at your platform before you build it, and try to decide, where are the likely changes going to happen? The example I gave about DNS for log shipping, we've tried to change that before, and it's required changes on the client machines, and that is hard and painful. Look ahead of time and say, where are logical places I've seen change occur before? Where are logical places that change will happen? And how can I build an abstraction? How can I save my consumers from having to do any heavy lifting when that change comes? And you can find me on Twitter and GitHub here. I'm also on LinkedIn if you can find me. I'm actually very terrible at social media, but I do my best. And thank you very much.